they're forgot, but because touching them, even after decades, still leaves you with this icky feeling, a cold, nauseating dread that tells you something was fundamentally wrong. This is a story from my childhood, a time when I was too young to fight, too young to understand, but old enough to be terrified. The room and I was 13, starting at a suburban boarding school. My roommate was a kid named Weston. We were strangers, paired together in a small, sterile room, 2 beds, 2 desks, 1 tiny closet. It wasn't long before I realized Weston was off. My first clue was the list. He handed it to me, a folded piece of paper, presented with baffling seriousness, as if this were a mandatory orientation ritual. It was a list of things I was forbidden from bringing into the room. Most items were absurd, like frogs. Who brings a frog into a dorm room? But the last item, delivered with unnerving gravity, was salt. I searched my mind. Was it an allergy? A prank? The school banned food in the dorms anyway. What kind of creature is actively, violently repulsed by salt? This wasn't a joke. Weston was utterly humorless. Weston had a habit of whispering to himself late at night, full-on, low-pitched muttering in the pitch dark. It was creepy, but I learned to tune it out. What I couldn't ignore was the notebook. He guarded it like a treasure. One day, while he was out, curiosity clawed its way past my fear. I found it exactly where I expected, shoved under his mattress. It wasn't a diary. It was a single, long list of names. And here's where the blood ran cold. Many names were crossed out. They were kids from our school. And then, there it was, near the bottom, uncrossed, my name. What did the crossed-out names mean? Were they enemies? Targets? The dread I felt was primal. I knew, absolutely knew, that Weston was not just a socially awkward kid. I grew paranoid. I spent all my time out of the room. Then came the snake. A week later, I found a garden snake coiled on my pillow. I screamed. Weston merely looked up, apologized with a blank face, and claimed it was a prank. When I asked where he got it, he gave a one-word answer I'll never forget: the woods. Then, the wild animal slithered, on its own, straight into an empty jar on his desk. It obeyed him. But the breaking point was the night I woke up. I found Weston standing over my bed, just inches from my face, perfectly still, with a slow, empty smile. He said I was talking in my sleep. But his eyes, they were utterly vacant. I was shaking, but that wasn't the worst of it. Later that week, I was jolted awake, not by Weston, but by a horrifying dream. I was paralyzed, watching a dark, amorphous mass descend from the ceiling. A black, sharp claw scraped my bed frame before recoiling violently, as if burned. Then, a deafening crash. I snapped awake. The dream was real. The window was shattered. The room was ransacked, and there were deep, undeniable scratch marks exactly where the claw had been in my nightmare. Weston was asleep, snoring, impossibly deep in slumber. I tried to wake him, desperate to blame him, desperate for a human witness. He wouldn't stir. When he finally did wake up, he started hissing like a wounded animal and yelling in. Every summer, I visited my grandparents' remote farm in Pennsylvania. I slept in the attic room. The first summer was fine, but the second, the oddities began. I'd be reading late when I'd hear soft, slow footsteps coming up the stairs. The sound would stop, and I'd watch the doorknob slowly turn and open about 6 inches. I'd freeze, pretending to be asleep, convinced it was my grandma checking on me. But I never heard the door close, and I never heard her retreat. My grandfather dismissed it as an old house settling or maybe raccoons in the walls. But one night, I woke to my bed shaking, and a dark, indistinct figure was standing at the foot of my bed. I'd close my eyes and count to 100. When I opened them, the figure was gone. The truth from Francisco, the confirmation. Narrator. Years passed. After my grandparents passed away, I met my cousin, Francisco, at the funeral. He had stayed in the same attic room, just a few weeks after I did, every summer. I asked him about the creepy occurrences, expecting him to laugh or share a similar story. His face went blank. He just said, "That's nothing. That thing used to touch me." What he described was horrifying. The figure didn't just watch him. It would sit on his bed, and he would feel the mattress sink with its weight. Then, he would feel fingers tracing his face, sometimes even gripping his wrist. He said he kept his eyes squeezed shut, but he knew it wasn't Grandma. He said the hands were rough and scratchy. Not the gentle hands of our aging grandparents. Narrator: his mother had called him delusional, told him to stop complaining. So, we both suffered in silence. Hearing him confirm my nightmares made the terror real. And gave it a name, the thing. We still don't know what it was. A monster? A spirit? Or was there a stranger, a human trespasser with rough hands, living undetected in the dark corners of my grandparents' home? I still can't decide which possibility is worse. A friend in the window. Narrator: at 9 years old. My third-floor bedroom window looked straight into the house 20 feet behind ours. The window across from mine was usually dark, until one day, there was a girl. She looked my age, with dark hair, always wearing the same bright yellow sweater. We became window friends. We'd wave, play charades, and hold up drawings. But she never, ever opened her window. Only smiling and pointing to the glass when I tried to talk. The silent plea. Narrator: the games ended when the tapping started. I woke up at 2 a.m. to a quiet tap tap tap. The girl was at her window, no longer smiling. She looked frantic, pointing down, making a pleading gesture. I got scared and crawled back into bed, ignoring her. She was gone for 3 days. When she returned, she was pressing her face against the glass, her breath fogging the pain in the warm May weather. Her mouth was moving, soundlessly. But I could read her lips, "Help me." Then she stepped back, and I saw it, a dark, ugly stain had appeared on her bright yellow sweater. I ran to my parents, screaming. The curtain and the truth, the conclusion. Narrator: the next afternoon, I spoke to Mrs. Murphy, the elderly homeowner. When I described the girl, the dark hair, the yellow sweater, the closed window, Mrs. Murphy stopped smiling. She looked at me with cold shock and told me, simply, to go back inside. That night, my parents moved my bed and hung heavy, light-blocking curtains. My window was sealed off. They told me I was too old for imaginary friends. It took until high school for my mother to finally tell me the truth. The previous owners had a daughter named Jenna. She was 11. When she was killed by a car right in front of the house. Immediately after school. She was wearing a yellow sweater. The Murphys, who were very spiritual, bought the house but eventually had to completely seal the third floor room after things kept happening. Narrator: I am 34 now. I live in a house with no windows that face another building. That is not an accident. I can't shake the memory of her frantic face, the fog on the glass, or the blood-red stain on the yellow sweater. Was I playing games with a lonely ghost? Or was I witnessing the trapped final plea of a little girl who couldn't leave her window? I may never know, but I've spent my life avoiding the answer in every reflection.